There's this moment about halfway through Bullet Witch where our hero, a gun-toting magic user named Alicia, is forced to fight a flying serpent monster on top of an airplane. It's every bit as over-the-top ridiculous as you would hope for, with flying eyeballs everywhere and explosions coming from all sides. If this is the type of goofy fun you're expecting from a game called Bullet Witch, then I want to start this review by telling you to look elsewhere. The few brief moments of absolute lunacy are surrounded by a mediocre third-person shooter with terrible gameplay and a laughably lame story. Even at just 4 hours, this game is too long. This was not my first encounter with Alicia. Back in 2006, I reviewed the game when it first hit the Xbox 360, and I wasn't a big fan. It was the kind of bad that's easy to forget. It wasn't fun to play, and it had very few redeeming qualities, but it wasn't so much of a train wreck that it scarred me for life. The truth is, I'd completely forgotten that I even owned the game until just last week when XSEED decided that it would be a good idea to bring Bullet Witch to the PC. I'm not sure why this is happening after 12 years, but it did give me an opportunity to give this game a second chance. And the result? Well, it still sucks. Like I said at the top, this is the story of a witch named Alicia who uses her magical abilities and broomstick-shaped machine gun to fight zombies. She seemingly comes out of nowhere and is filled with mysteries, 2 things that'll be explored as she fights through 6 action-packed stages and teams up with a bunch of confused soldiers. On paper, Alicia sounds like an incredible action hero. She has a memorable gun, loves blowing stuff up, and can summon lightning and tornadoes like Halle Berry in the X-Men. Toss her into a world where giant demons are literally tearing the city apart in front of your eyes, and you have a game that pretty much makes itself. If only it were that easy. What we get instead is a third-person shooter that seems to be made by developers who don't understand why people like third-person shooters. Let's start with the gameplay, which can best be described as sluggish. Alicia lumbers around at a slow pace, and the combat reminds me of the old PlayStation 2 game Gungrave. She can leap out of the way and cast magic spells to get out of trouble, but there's no getting around that she's slow and stiff. The result is a game where you largely walk up to bad guys and shoot them until they die. Actually, that brings me to one of my more unusual complaints. The bad guys don't react like you'd expect from a third-person shooter. What I mean by that is you'll unleash dozens of bullets into them and they won't even react. There's never a sense where you're injuring the bad guys until the very end where they fall down to the ground and die. There's nothing satisfying about shooting a bullet sponge, and that proves to be one of the biggest problems with this game. Unfortunately, it's not the only problem. There's also the issue where the levels are too large for what the developers do with them. Some of these levels are so large that it's easy to get lost and not even know where you're supposed to go. They're also empty, completely lacking in bad guys on screen. Sure, there are times when you'll have to deal with tanks or shoot down a giant demon, but that's usually after you spend 5 minutes wandering around a lifeless city with no personality. There's just nothing remotely fun or interesting about these stages. And that's the problem I had throughout the entire 4-hour adventure. There are certainly moments that stand out, but they're sandwiched between some of the worst third-person shooting I've come across all year. This is a game that felt dated in 2006, and the last dozen years of action games haven't magically made this one feel fresher. This isn't a throwback to a simpler time, but rather an example of how far we've come in the last 12 years. What they probably should have done is simply remade the game or given it a proper sequel. Alicia isn't a bad character and her story is interesting enough, but it's clear that the gameplay could have been handled better. Scrap everything about the original 2006 game and give us a more agile character who isn't simply stuck in a painfully bland third-person shooter. Is that too much to ask? I honestly don't know what people expected from this way too late PC port. Bullet Witch isn't some hidden gem that's been misunderstood all this time, but is rather a poorly conceived action game that wasn't good then and is even worse now. I guess some gamers may get a kick out of the terrible voice acting and the 2 boss battles, but there just isn't enough here to warrant the price. Bullet Witch was at its best when everybody forgot it existed. Hey, thanks for watching our review of Bullet Witch. So here's the question I have for you. What's a bad game that you want to see remastered? Let me clarify. It doesn't have to be a terrible game, just something that isn't very good that you still kinda like. For example, neither of those Stuntmen games quite nailed the potential, but I wouldn't mind seeing them given a remake. Let me hear your picks in the comments below. Still want more Bullet Witch? Then you should click over to our brand new episode of Great Moments in Bad Acting. We spend 10 minutes enjoying the hammy overacting. I also recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.